Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar of the Observatory of Populism that Marc Lazare and myself have initiated at Institut Montaigne. We are very fortunate tonight to have two experts to deal with a key issue, populism in the digital age. And the first speaker today, the main speaker today, Asma Malla, is an expert in tech policy, a teacher at Sciences Po and also at Columbia University, at Polytechnique in France as well. And she teaches political and geopolitical issues of data economy. And she's also an associate expert for the EU, the European Research Executive Agency. She will introduce the conversation, and after presenting her views on this very topical subject, we'll have as a discussant David Chavalarias, who is a research director at CNRS. He is part of the CAMS, the Center for Analysis of Social Mathematics, and also the author of a book that is only in French for the moment, but hopefully it will be translated into English, Toxic Data, and that's how networks, social media manipulate public opinions. Both of them will introduce the discussion. Asma will speak first for something like 25-30 minutes. Afterwards, David will initiate the discussion, introduce the discussion, and then we'll have a session of questions and answers, the Q&A, the usual Q&A session. So please do not hesitate to use the Q&A box for asking your questions, and raise your hands if you want to also participate and ask your question directly. We'll have enough time for you to allow you to ask the questions you have in mind, and that may be always a little bit technical for such a topic. I mean, that's one of the dimensions. Asma, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christophe, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here with you this evening to discuss such a complex, let's say this way, issue with you and David. Maybe to start the webinar and the discussion, I'm going to point out, the different layers and nature of what is social media today. And the first point, the very well-known one, is the economic aspect of social media: virality, attention economy, construction of recommendation algorithms that keep our attention on the platforms to get the maximum data we can gather, to then micro-target people and profile them to sell them some stuff, ideology, and so on. So this is the first level. The second one, and I'm not going to develop this one because I think that David mastered it better than I do, first, and second, it's pretty well documented. The second layer is more political, is the micro-targeting political softwares during political campaigns and elections. We have, the very well-known Cambridge Analytica scandal, but what is more interesting to see is that Salvini himself and his teams developed what we call La Bestia, which is the beast, a very big algorithm, I think. It was a very sophisticated expert system monitoring social media in real time and enabling Salvini and his teams to stick to the trending issues and to the tone, the right feeling, the right emotion in real time, and then to fragment actually the political program. So what's really interesting with populism and social media is that it enables the combination of the two phenomena enable them the fragmentation of ideology and to micro-target, your voters and their opinion, which is a very huge democratic problem, actually. If you have no one vision, but you actually adapt your speech, your vision, your program, and what you say to your target, then actually you have a very big problem then to conduct the right policy. Regarding La Bestia, or the beast, it has been duplicated by Zemmour teams, actually, during the late French elections. And they tried, and they pretty well succeeded in targeting, their voters, the swing voters. They were at stake here. And it was really interesting to see that even in France, and within our legal framework, we can actually develop this kind of systems. So the second is this political layer, and the third one, the most maybe innovative one, is the geopolitical one. Actually, social media are weaponized and are becoming the fifth ground, the fifth field of confrontation in what we call cyberspace, in terms of hybrid warfare and information warfare. And here we got, the social media as tools, as spaces to spread, build, construct specific narratives on a very industrial scale, by foreign operations, what we call foreign interference, disinformation, manipulation of information. And here, what is at stake is not to convert our public opinion to their ideology. Russia has no agenda to convert us to their ideology. The goal here is to strengthen our weaknesses, our democratic malaise, actually, to spread confusion, to spread defiance in our political system, and to develop and to promote, to encourage, for example, conspiracy groups like QAnon. But I will maybe develop this point, the convergence between conspiracy and organic disinformation and foreign interference. And what I'm trying to highlight here and to point out is that we absolutely need not to analyze these three layers like silos, but to get, the systemic vision of the big picture of the problem. And maybe here we lack this systemic vision. Sometimes, and often actually, we analyze social media on the economic level, or the political one, or the geopolitical one, but not the three imbricated and interconnected. And actually, they are a system. And what I'm trying to say is that social media are a point of junction between what? Between a certain ideology, like, the free speech absolutists, such as Elon Musk, for example, when he promotes a free speech maximalist vision that is legal in the United States because it's backed by the First Amendment. It's not illegal, but it's a very big democratic problem because it's a call, it's a signal to whom? To conspiracy groups, to QAnon, and to Russia and China in their interference operations, for example. So the first problem here, and the first dimension, is the ideology of some entrepreneurs, of some CEOs of those social media. We got the same issue with Zuckerberg on different thematics. The second movement is the alt-right groups, like in the US, but also in Europe and more generally in liberal democracies. And the alt-right activists, with some contrarian, let's say, movements, are developing their base on social media. Because what? Because of what? Because they have no access to mainstream media. So they need social media to develop their narrative. And what's really interesting again here is, I don't know if you know Peter Thiel, but Peter Thiel is one of the famous founder of PayPal and now Palantir. And Peter Thiel, for example, was a friend, a very intimate friend of Elon Musk during the PayPal time. And he has a very strong and huge vision of the world, of the US. He's a contrarian. He's an anti-system ideologist, and he's financing some candidates like DeSantis, for example, the NotCon in the US, the very big, nationalist convention. And he also investing in Rumble. What is Rumble? It's a far right, let's say, social media, where you can find, with no moderation, promoting really no moderation, where you can find, supremacists, racists, and all, those extreme political extreme groups in the US. So we have a kind of, we are witnessing a kind of turning point here, where a certain part of the elite, of the technological elite of the Silicon Valley, is converting itself to the alt-right ideology or to the contrarian ideology and financing men. They are active in promoting these ideas. So they feed what? They feed conspiracy groups such as QAnon. I mentioned it. And what is, again, here interesting is to see that QAnon themselves and their narratives and their arguments are fed by the alt-right, that's right, but also by the foreign narratives. For example, during the last midterms in the US, we monitored that QAnon developed and reused the whole Ukraine-Nazi narrative, Russian narrative, pro-Putin narrative, or in terms of recycling, the Chinese narrative, the anti-Taiwanese narrative. And the whole idea here, or the common point here, is not really common vision of the world, but a common stand against some liberal values. And in the US, the idea is to say that to make America great again, the state have to step back from the world and just to take care of the Americans and about the national security. And on the top of that, you have all the anti-woke narrative and fight and etc. So it's kind of big ecosystem converging where? On social media, and they feed each other. And those interactions between foreign activities, organic disinformation and conspiracy theories, and big tech entrepreneurs developing and promoting free speech, let's say, and sometimes personal ideology, is becoming problematic. And what is interesting to note is that last week, Joe Biden himself has launched an article in the Wall Street Journal calling to a bipartisan coalition between Republicans and Democrats to regulate big tech, and more specifically to reform the very famous Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act that actually protect platforms and online media and social media and allows them to moderate the content and user speech as they will, as they want. So actually what we got here is that terms and conditions of use of the platforms are actually filling the blank of the law in the US. And I'm talking about the US because it's very pregnant and very visible here or there, but it's coming here in Europe because we use the same social media because they are porous, they have no borders, and we got a huge problem of regulation. And the DSA, maybe we can talk about the DSA, the Digital Service Act, which is the big, a regulation package of the European Commission, tackle many problems, focuses a lot, I think, on moderation, but moderation can't be, but really, and I insist, can't be the only answer to the systemic problem. We have another, let's say, issues like the governance of the social media, the economic model of the social media, and the most important thing, moderation is by definition ex post. By definition, it condemns us to be always running behind the problem. We need to have some extreme actions to intervene on our cognitive resistance. What I'm saying here is that the information warfare can be internal, inner, organic, can be external, hybrid warfares. But at the end, our brains, individual brains, us, citizens, we are soldiers, actually. We are in that war. We are involved in it. And maybe we have to develop another way to turn around the problem and to say that moderation, for example, is necessary, and it is, but it's absolutely not sufficient. And just to finish, I don't know, I'm not keeping my timing, but here in France, we talk a lot about, the critical thinking awareness programs, education programs of the youngest people to the disinformation issues. And I think it's really important, but you know that conspiracy groups sometimes come from critical thinking. They're looking for a way, a sense, a meaning to some events, and they overthink, actually. So even if we just tackle the problem on the moderation / critical thinking, we are not on the whole value chain of disinformation and manipulation.
Introduction to the topic. You've dealt with the political, the geopolitical, the technical, and also regulatory dimensions of this, and we'll return to the points you've raised in the discussion, I'm sure. And this discussion will now be initiated by Dave.
Hello, can you hear me? It's okay? Okay, perfect. So I will share my screen because I have few things to show you. I will take some point of the previous presentation and also illustrate with some research that we are doing at the Complexity Institute. So mainly the question could be phrased as you go from these states to that states of society, which is like a total mess. And what is the most striking is that, for example, for the January 6th event, we see that this is absolutely not a fad. as it was said, this is really acting on our social construct, our brain. And for example, 1 year after this event, we still have almost half the Americans that still believes that we should split the United States into two different group of states. So we have this idea of surveillance capitalism that was spoken before, and also with the question of targeting a user through the collection of the data, either for advertisements or political ads. But it's only one side of the big tech coin, because, for example, it's explained part of the populism in the extent that you can do some targeting advertising, but it does not explain how you build so large scales groups that are radicalized and that are opposing each other. So what I want to focus on to complement the previous presentation is that you really have three phenomena that converge to paint the democracies. You have on one side the human psychology that is not adapted to the digital environments with numerous bias. We will see some of them. You have this economy of attention that optimizes the behavior of the big tech user independently, individual or collective well-being. And then you have this cyber warfare that we just talked before. And one of the conjectures of the book Toxic Data that have been presented before is that this situation is incompatible with the sustainability of the democracies. And so now we just will quickly zoom in, but I want to share with you some idea about what we have online. So I will show you like a visualization of real behavior of what we have online. And I will base this, this is from the Politoscope project that we are conducting as a Complex System Institute, where we are following online on Twitter in France and also in the United States, hundreds, several million of users and also of keywords, and we are collecting tweets and we reconstruct the dynamics of the exchange. So, for example, we were talking about a group of people that try to destabilize democracy and act in a synchronous way. So here you remember, some of you might remember there was this issue about Macron leaks during the presidential elections, where you have groups of extreme right in France that were acting with group of extreme rights in the United States to disseminate fake information about Macron with the intention to change the result of the elections. So just to show you what, how we can see this online. Here you have every dot here is a Twitter account, and the link between the Twitter accounts, they are some circulation of information. So here you see almost hour after hours how these groups are structuring online. So if I make like just a pause of this film, what you see here is that you have a group here that is the extreme right. So each account, again, it's some Twitter accounts that is linking to this group here that is extreme right in United States, so the alt-rights. And here you see hour per hour how they synchronize to relay the idea of these Macron leaks. So all these people are talking about the Macron leaks just 2 days before the presidential election, and you see these two blogs that are synchronizing. What is interesting here is that this is done through two different states. One of these group is in the one of these group is in the United States, the other is in France. So this is to illustrate that now we have online environments that are internationalized, and where you have despatialization, you have no more border, you have massification, you can have huge collective action of hundreds of thousands of people that are acting at exactly the same times. And also you have searchability, so people can search people that are like them. So if they want to interfere with an election or defend one camp of the other, they can search people like them and coordinate. And so this leads to what we call stronger echo chambers. I mean, So stronger group of people that are like-minded and they can act in the same direction and eventually destabilize some elections or a country, even though they don't belong to that country. For example, in France, we have observed the evolution of the French political landscapes. So here again, you have it's smaller, but each dot here is a Twitter account. And this is the political landscapes in 2016, and this is the political landscapes in 2022. Every color here represents a political party. And here, again, the links is the circulation of information between the accounts. And here you see that in 2016, we have a political landscape that was going from extreme right here to extreme left here, Marine Le Pen, Mélenchon, and the information flow from one committee to the other going through the center here. In 2022, it's very different. We have a very huge cluster here of extreme left and populist group here. And now there is direct connection between the two most extreme parties, which is France Insoumise here, and here Renaissance, Zemmour, and Philippot. And here, this is Emmanuel Macron, which is isolated. So you have reconfiguration of this space, and along with this reconfiguration, what we can observe that there is a huge increase of hostility between these communities. So France is more or less taking the same path as the United States or the Brazilian societies, where you have extreme communities that are more and more hostile to each other with incompatible views. So this brings me to another bias. I will not expose all of them, just to launch a discussion, but one is very important. It's called the negativity bias. We have to know that, to notice that, for example, on Facebook, you have more than 300 friends on average. So this means that you cannot read all the information produced by all your friends on the same days. And this is why Facebook and all the other platforms, they set up some news feeds which are curated by their algorithm. And they present you only a small fraction of what is produced by the social environment. So the question is that when they show you some messages, on which message you will click first. For example, if they present you these two messages that were on vaccines, one says that vaccines are 90% effective. The other says that vaccines are unsafe for children. On which message you will first click to have more information. So you see that one is more like good news, the other has some anxious content and it's quite negative. And so the negative bias in psychology says that on average, you will be more likely to click on the second message to just know what is the problem. But now we have a problem is that, so since we interact preferentially, because this is, we can cognitively wired, we can say, we interact preferentially with anxiety, provoking or negative content. When we are online on these environments, they are not passive, they are active, they are learning from our actions, and they are learning from our actions so that because they want to optimize our engagements, and they want to propose more about what we like. And what we like is learned through the click and through the comments. So what happened at the end is that the individual negative bias, which everybody experiments, is amplified in this kind of environment toward an algorithmic negative bias with an overexposure to this kind of negative content. So this is a kind of distortion of what we have in this environments. So what we can say is that digital platform by design, because they optimize the engagements just to optimize their economic revenue, they also amplify polemics and negative contents. And by this way, they degrade the political debates and make the populist rhetoric, which is based on fear and hunger, more visible and also more viral. So I will soon stop because there is so much to say, but I want just to finish with this other point, is that if you ask yourself why society is becoming more and more unstable into this kind of social environment, in addition to all what we said, both of us in the previous talk, I think we should follow the social influence. Social influence is a very strong factors of morphogenesis in human societies. And there is a very interesting theorem that was formulated in the 1976. So it was like almost 20 years before internet. And I just summarize this here. It was formulated by von Foersters, it was conjectures, and after demonstrated by Jean-Pierre Dupuis. The meaning of this theorem is to say that when you have a collective, like for example, large social systems, the more correlated are the inter-individual relations. So the more correlated are the behavior of the member of this society, the more the behavior of the totality, the collective, will appear to the individual elements that compose it as endowed with its dynamics of their own that escapes their control. This means that the more you have correlation between elements of a system, the more you will have large-scale collective dynamics that are more or less independent of each component. But the second aspect of that is that for an outside observer that observe all this interaction, of course, and we can discuss about that, but of course, the more you have correlation between the components, the more the observation of a small fraction of the systems allow you to predict the behavior of the whole systems. So this conceptual theorem brings something very interesting in the framework of the ITs and the question of social influence. If you think about social networks, what they do is that they considerably increase social influence because they propose recommendation, rating, likes, virality. So every time you know more about what the others are doing, and so you are more likely to base your behavior on what others are doing. The consequences, if you follow this von Foerster theorem, is that collective dynamics are becoming more contingent. So where they go to what is more contingent, they are becoming less predictable a priori and more massive. So technically, it is reinforcing the past dependencies of these dynamics. But at the same time, these dynamics become also more easily predictable and more easily manipulated for those who can act either on the data or who can observe all the data. This means that when you observe the beginning of the dynamics, you are more likely to predict the end. And this is, for example, what Amazon does when he sees the beginning of the order for a book. So he knows that it will have more or less success very early, so he can ship the book in advance, etc., etc. So this leads to a concept of capitalism of influence, is that it's a form of capitalism that not only use digital data to make some targeting, advertising, etc., but also shape the social groups and the social influence in a way that it's advantageous to its protagonists. And this form of capitalism has a lot of fragilities. So this is for conclusion, as a conclusions. As an effect under the influence of this form of capitalism, democracy becomes more unstable because those who master the digital environment have an economic interest in saturating this environment with social influence. You have economic interest to put more recommendation, more like, more sharing, etc., etc. But if we follow the previous theorem, this saturation, and this has been demonstrated empirically, makes collective behavior both more unstable, more massive, and allow moderate scale manipulation to lead to large scale disruption. And this is what does Russia, for example, when it acts locally on some social systems. And also, so this saturation makes possible for external social actors to manipulate this collective and at key moment of the evolution, typically, for example, at moment of election, like at the Macron leaks events. Actors of hostile to democracy exist. You have Russia, you have China, you have lots of all these dictatorships. And also they have like just the door wide open to act on their environment because the big tech is just selling the influence. You can buy political advertising. It's very easy. So in the long run, you will have no more democracy if it continues like that. So I will end with few. I just give the ideas and we can go to the discussion. But they might be. There are several ideas to try to mitigate all these phenomena and risks. So at the individual level, you have, of course, a question of education, awareness, etc. But you should have also action at the collective level that we also speak about, by the way. So regulation, social observation device, etc., etc. And also at the institutional level, there is lots of things to do. For example, there is a really stakes into changing the voting systems. We can discuss about that. And as open questions, we can ask ourselves, how can adapt the educational systems to this kind of new situation? How can address the kind of systemic risks posed by the systemic platform, because this is what they are? Should we limit or even ban this micro-targeting? So how we can do that in the framework of the open economy? Should we more strictly regulate in terms of condition of social media platforms, or also encourage support independent social media? For example, you have now lots of open source solutions that could be deployed very easily at low cost. To give you an idea, the cost for platforms like Twitter's per user is about $10 per year to maintain a structure like that. So we can ask ourselves as a democracy if it is worth to spend $10 per citizen to have a safe environment for information exchange. And also maybe we should change the law regarding to the property of large-scale social data sets. Do you have the right to just collect all the data on all the citizens and use this for targeting, or should this be banned or made public in some way, etc., etc.? So I will stop here because I have been much too long for now. Yes, and this is the book that we just talked about, and some colleagues that work with me on this program. Thank you very much.
David, and thank you for showing clearly how the topic we are scrutinizing today is interdisciplinary. You know, we need to bring together not only social scientists, but of course, clearly IT engineers, specialists of social collective psychology. For the Observatory of Populism, the clear relevance of this lays in the fact that with social media, political leaders can relate directly to the people, directly to the citizens. They can really circumvent institutions, political parties, parliaments, and relate directly to the people and spread their message, which is, of course, one of the reasons why democracy is affected. But you give other reasons why democracy is affected by this development of social media. This is the points we will have to address as well, sometimes with some technical questions. I will ask Mark, who has questions, to start, and then anybody who has questions can either raise his hand or her hand, or of course ask the question in the box, Q&A box. Mark.
Yes, thank you, Christophe, and thank you, Esma and David. It was very, very interesting and very exciting because so many points were present in your papers. Esma, I have a question linked obviously to the Italian case. I know a little bit where you were speaking about La Bestia of Matteo Salvini, the social media. You're absolutely right. It was a staff organized with so many good experts and young people who were working 24 hours on 24 hours, 7 days on 7 days. And we have the impression and the feeling that it was a kind of irresistible rise of Matteo Salvini because of this capacity of managing these social media. But that has been from 2017, 2018, for just 1 year. And this is a point I would like to ask you, because since 2019 and 2020 now, there is a real big political decline of Matteo Salvini, which seems a very good thing for democracy. I'm not so sure it's a good thing, because the woman who profit of that has been Giorgia Meloni. But this is an element of reflection. First of all, it means that maybe even if you have a good capacity of organizing social media, it's not sufficient to be a good political leader. And so I would like to know from you, what's your explanation of this incredible success from 1 year, 1 year and a half of La Bestia, which impressed everybody. So many articles and so many papers have been published about that. And just after this very quick decline of Salvini's influence. David, one naive question first, and another question. Naive questions, do we have information now and good elements about the sociology of the users of these social media? Do we know, for instance, which kind of social categories use a lot or not so much the social media? Do we know something about the age, generations, for instance, and so on? Do we have some information now quite good on that in France or in other countries? Because I've been very interested by what you presented, and especially these interactions between French, European, and American networks, for instance. But excuse me of the banality, I'm going to say, but to use this kind of social media means you spend a lot of time. So do we have information on that? And my second question is a classical historical objection. Okay, you explain us there is a big polarization and this instability of democracy because all these social media play about fear, anger, and so on. But is it so new? I mean, if I am thinking to l'affaire Dreyfus in France, for instance, at the end of the 19th century, if we are thinking of the 30s in Europe, we had a very big polarization, and we knew that in this moment there was a great instability of democracy. So it's a provocation for you, but just to explain us, is it so new, or maybe what it is so new in respect to these historical moments I was referring? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Asma, and then David.
Thank you very much, Mark, for I was switching to French for your comment and your question, because yes, you are right. La Bestia was really a proof of concept of how political leaders populist leaders can manipulate and can use social media to win a campaign. And where you are right, and actually it's linked to your second question to David, is that it's only a tool, actually. First, it's only that. It's an error to over measure or to overestimate what is AI, what is data science, what are algorithms. They are expert systems. They can be very sophisticated, and La Bestia was very sophisticated, but it's only a tool. First. Second element of answer is that the target and the goal of those systems was actually not to convert the silent majority. Actually, their target was their own voters, so already voters for Salvini and his view and values, and the swing voters, those who are hesitating, those who are uncertain. So it was more a nudge tool for those people than the majority. And in a certain way, or from some perspective, it's a pretty good sign actually for our democracies. And I am not really pessimistic. I have another weak signals that democracy, on the contrary, you know, of all our narratives and all our feeling that it's very weak, and it is nowadays very weak, it's not the end of our model, and it's not the end of our liberal values. Why I'm saying that? When Musk, you know, tweeted his poll regarding the Ukrainian peace plan, remember? Or when he talked about the new status of Taiwan, or when he asked his followers if he should retreat from Twitter or stay as a full CEO of Twitter, each time the results of the polls were actually against his point of view or against him. They were against, you know, the retreat of the US or this bizarre peace plan. They were pro, the nomination of another CEO for Twitter, for example, because the signal was, it's enough. It's enough with your compulsive tweets. It's enough with your compulsive, you know, views of the world, personal views of the world, etc. So it's very interesting. Our first behavior, our first reaction was to bash, you know, this Twitter polls, but actually they are also a sign of what people think. And the results were not that negative or were not that pessimistic actually about, you know, the robustness of our democracies. First. Second, I just want to mention the Brazilian case, because actually it's linked. Off the record, we're talking, you know, about this kind of global populism. And please do not forget that you have a new kind of populist actors, and they are tech leaders, they are tech entrepreneurs. And why I'm saying that? In last October, when you know, we were in the middle of the Brazilian campaign, Bolsonaro tweeted about Musk and saying that he was, when Musk, you know, confirmed the takeover of Twitter, and Bolsonaro said that he was very happy that Musk was buying Twitter because it was a breath of hope and a good signal for freedom, actually. And what we have to hear in Bolsonaro's saying is that Musk and Bolsonaro are pretty close. And why they're close? Because in spring 2022, Musk was in Brazil, received like a king or like a very big, important leader by Bolsonaro himself. And why? Because he was trying to deploy Starlink. You know, Starlink are, you know, this low Earth orbit satellites developed by SpaceX, one of the company of Musk. And Brazil and Amazonia are a huge number one priority market for Musk. So you see that economic interests and stakes are linked to ideology and are linked to, you know, the promotion of populisms. And in Brazil, Bolsonaro and Musk were dealing this market about Starlink in Amazonia, and Musk won the market. And when the campaign became a bit hard for the alt-right camp, Musk, CEO of Twitter, after the takeover, decided that, and tweeted about it, decided that, you know, the ban of some alt-right activist account should be investigated. And he fired Twitter moderators who banned those accounts, implying that they were promoting left-wing activists and left-wing vision of the world and values. So you see that economic and ideological interests are interconnected and combined in the Brazilian context. And just to finish on the example, during the riots 2 weeks ago in Brasilia, the trending topics on Twitter pushed by Twitter algorithms were you know, Brazilian Spring and Brazil was stolen. Brazilian Spring is on their signs, and Brazilian Spring was conceived by Steve Bannon actually some months ago. So you see that this interconnected ecosystem is not a system, but it's not a thought organized, I don't think, system, but you have this convergence, this junction on Twitter, for example. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that the riots in Brazil was the fault or caused by Twitter. Actually, the mainstream in 2 words in Brazil are actually private messaging apps like WhatsApp. It's not Twitter, but it's very interesting to take Twitter as an example of the convergence of the 3 layers I was explaining in the beginning of the webinar: economic, ideological, and political. And actually, they are really linked. And the Brazilian case is very interesting from that point of view.
Thank you, Asma. David?
Yes, so first question, sociology about user of social networks. Social networks are, so there is first diversity of social networks with different population of users. And for example, if you take Twitter, we know that it is not representative of French population. It is more young. It's also generally more educated, etc. But that say, we have to know that 9 out of 10 internet users are on social networks. More than 70% of people above 13 worldwide are on social networks. More than 38% of French people say take at least once a week their information from social networks. So this means that whatever the bias, it is massive. And if you add this to the fact that most elections, they are won or lost by 1%, then you see that this could have a massive effect. Now, what about the effect and the polarization? Of course, it's not new polarization. You mentioned after Dreyfus, but today we have new phenomena. First, it's the scale. It's not only a few intellectuals in France or maybe a significant fraction of the French population, but it could be at the scales of the planet worldwide. Also, it's the speed. You can influence people not after a few months of hard labor, but just by releasing some leaks or false information. In 3 days, you can reach millions of people. You can also more easily rely on emotions because you have the video, you have the image, all this. You also obviously have targeting advertising that Asma described previously. You also have more level of social information, and what I described just before with Frankfurt theorem is very important. This means that really you can have social dynamics that go without guides out of the rails, and you can have a significant fraction of the population that just live in an alternative reality, just like that. On the Dreyfus affair, there was like some uncertainty about what really happened. There was an inquiry: was he a spy or not, etc. So anti-Semitic people, they were more bound to think that he was a spy, but things it was not like totally fake news or absurd statements like we steal the election with, So this changed everything, I think, at that moment. And to end, so this internationalization, you have like now international groups, you have a notion of out intern, so international of alt-rights, which like international of communists. That is a group of people that just move from one country to the other in the digital pace just to influence the pace of the democracy. So all these things are changing the situation very significantly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will read out the question that Jacques Rupnik has posted in the chat. You have presented a very dark though accurate picture of the social media role do to our democracies. However, whatever happened to the very positive assessment given more than a decade ago of the social media capacity to undermine dictatorships? Remember Tahir, the Twitter revolution, and similar labels, I suppose, used for mobilizations during the Arab Springs, but also in places like Moldova. How to reconcile the two? Well, it's a question that, of course, we ask ourselves. Each technique has a positive side. It depends how you use it. As Asma said, it's a tool. Now, how do you reconcile the two is a difficult question. Who wants to offer some response first? Yes, Asma.
I'm not sure. I will try not to repeat my answer to Marc about La Bestia, but it's a very interesting comment about how social media at a certain time during the years 2010 became a tool of empowerment of some activists in some context in some part of the world, and it was actually one of the utopia of internet, in the 60s. It was like a new tool of, this free and total access to knowledge, to empowerment. And the empowerment idea is very North American, actually, because it's based on the community vision of the nation and the national unity, actually. In France, for example, our political vision is not based on community or one community, the national one. But yes, it was a tool of empowerment at that time. And it is only a tool. But what is different today, and that's why I was highlighting and underlying and pointing out the Brazilian case with Musk and Bolsonaro, but we can also talk about Zuckerberg in Vietnam, Zuckerberg in Ethiopia, etc., is that social media and have a big governance problem here, because they are political entities and they have no accountability except towards the market or towards nobody in the Twitter case, because Twitter is not listed in the stock market anymore, and then you have a very solitary exercise of power. And because in the US, you have the First Amendment backed by the Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, then when you have a Musk or Zuckerberg or anyone else with a certain ideology and with a certain vision of moderation, then you have actually their vision and their ideology prevail. Okay, so this is the big difference between, Tahrir, between the Arab Springs in general, or what we saw in Central Europe, or even Black Lives Matter. Actually, what Occupy Wall Street also were movements, civil movements empowered by social media. But the difference here is that David has explained it very well. The negative biases, the negative emotions, because virality, because there's an economy behind that, first. And second, you have now some tech entrepreneurs and actually populists like Musk, who are going to promote, encourage some vision and some values and some vision of the world. And I think, sadly, that what we saw in Brazil, but even during the midterms, will not enable this kind of movements anymore, or at that scale, actually, or at least. And that's why Biden published this tribune last week, and that's why we have to think about, the governance of these hybrid actors.
Yeah.
I don't know if my answer was convincing enough, but tell me.
We'll have an opinion poll at the end. David.
Yeah, good correction. Also, so there is good aspects of social media, definitely. They help you to connect with relatives. They help you to access to information. So of course, there is good point. But if you look at the question about organization of the collective behavior, when you speak about the Arab Spring, what was the lesson? Is that now the country where they have some kind of unrest, they just cut the internet, and there is no more. You mean Irans, they redesigned their access to the main point of internet worldwide to be able to cut them just in one night. And so there is a profound asymmetry between democracy and dictatorship. That dictatorship, they don't bother about cutting the information channels. And so they have access to information channel of democracy, but in their own countries, they either just cut or they just ban. For example, Twitter is banned in China. China has developed its own entire ecosystem, informational ecosystems, and they control it. So in the dictatorships, the social media, they become tools for control of the societies. They even now become tools for control of societies outside dictatorships. For example, if you think about TikTok, TikTok is a social media which is governed by the PCC, and it's just a tool of influence. So it collects data from the user in the democracy, and at the right moment they can just send message or just moderate differently just to push their advantage. So dictatorships, they use social media as the right way for their own advantage, and we cannot counter that because they just forbid our own social media outside. Now, if you look inside the democracy, then yes, social media is good, but they are very vulnerable. And what we have assisted with Musk episode, it's just that the extreme right guy say, okay, Twitter is very influenced. I want to push my vision. I will buy it. And he bought it. So now we have all the data of all the journalists worldwide and political people, etc., all the private message of these guys that are in the hand of somebody that say, I want to make the cultural war. So this is a real problem. So
Thank you.
I'm not so optimistic than Asma.
Asma, you'll have an opportunity to elaborate on this, because the next question is in fact very much related. So you can bracket together your two responses. Aaron asked a question that is indeed in the same vein, referring to the positive potential of social media. And since this has not materialized, he asks, has social media been co-opted by far-right / anti-democratic forces, or is there something inherent or structural in big tech and social media that prevents it from being a tool for emancipatory politics? Well, you have already partly responded, but you may return to the issue, and then we'll move on, and we will, well, concentrate on the democratic context, because indeed, as David was saying, in authoritarian, even totalitarian regimes, it's a different story, unfortunately. Asma and David.
I just wanted to yeah, because I completely forgot, but to talk about the TikTok case, because it's very interesting. What is going on right now in the US, just before Christmas, and now in January in the US, is that the FCC, which is the equivalent of ARCEP in France, the biggest telecom regulatory instance of entity in the US, are trying to ban TikTok from the United States. And just before, in December, they voted, the Congress, I think, voted the ban of TikTok on government devices. And now they're trying to find the right legal way to just completely ban TikTok from the US. Why? Because gathering data and probably, but we have no proof of that, but probably send it in China, and then it's collected and gathered and manipulated over there for cybersecurity matters, of course, and organizing influence and interference campaigns and info operations in the US. And actually, the first one who talked about the issue was Trump. Remember in 2019 when he tried to ban TikTok, and then they find another way just to make it bought by American actors like Walmart, I think, and Oracle or something like that. Anyway, you have, what we are witnessing right now in cyberspace, but actually on a geopolitical stand, is that we have the fragmentation of the global internet into some, ideological camps and blocks. So you have Russia that is trying to disconnect from the global network, and they are trying, and they have the whole big Russian doctrine of informational sovereignty. China has developed, its own ecosystem behind, protected by the China's firewall. Iran is also, managing its own ecosystem. And then we have us, democracies, the rest of the world. And the whole issue here, and what is at stake here, is to define what is our specificity, our political model that is not convergent with, the techno-surveillance tools of China, and all, the techno-authoritarian regimes, practices. And it's very hard to find, the right line, the right balance between what we should do and what we shouldn't do in democracies. And actually, we have the weaknesses of our strengths. It's very clear here. And what we see in the real world of geopolitics, we have the symmetric dynamic in the cyberspace with this fragmentation into those ideological blocks. And where, you know, China and Russia are very clear in their political models, or Iran, we are, you know, confronting a kind of existential, you know, questions. And if we take the United States situation, they are really right now at a turning point of their democratic history, because you have these two schools clashing and backlashing about what is freedom of speech in the US. And is our constitution is outdated, you know, in terms of First Amendment within a so polarized society. And you have, you know, the entrepreneur, and it's going to be the answer to the question, vision, Silicon Valley vision, no moderation. We are, you know, kings in our kingdoms, and we do absolutely what we want because it's legal, because it's the Constitution of the United States. And then you have the democratic leaders like Obama last spring, Biden last week, calling for a reform of the Section 230, not of the Constitution because it's too big and actually it's a taboo in the US, but at minimum, you know, the Section 230 and the responsibility and the accountability of the platforms. But I mean, it's not correct. We haven't tackled the problem here in our democracies. And I will finish and I will end my point like on that. In Europe, we have the norms, we have the legal answer, because what? Because we don't have our own infratech. We are dependent on the American ones. And here we have a huge technological sovereignty problem, and then a democratic one.
Okay. To react to the question about whether social media are right-wing or designated to be right-wing, it's not like, I don't think it's not the case, is that social media in a capitalist societies has always a risk to fall into increase the likelihood of totalitarianism or dictatorships for three reasons. Because when you are in capitalist societies, you need to be companies, the more they can predict the behavior of their user, the more they are efficient on the market. This means that the more they collect data about the users, the more they are efficient. So you have systems that push the companies to collect more and more data, which is what the big tech are doing. You are also in systems where that push toward heteronomy, because if I want to sell you my product, I want to make you dependent of my product. So I want to make you heteronomous toward my product in some sense. So you will push people to be for example, to have to go through their neural networks to communicate with your relatives. So you bring people into big ecosystems so that if they get out of these ecosystems, they just die or leave the society or something like that. And if you think about the big platforms, they reinforce these kind of things, because if you are banned from Twitter when you have 2 million followers, then you really lose something. And also in a capitalist society, you have this phenomena about rich get richer, because if you want to have a 50% returns of your action, then it means that the rich get richer. So if you combine all these three, this means that it concentrates the power of information into the hand of few. And so, so far so good if people are altruistic or have some morale, etc. But if this power and is the hand of somebody which is malicious or a dictator or whatever, then everything fails. The thing is that totalitarianism is like an absorbing state for these systems. When you fall into it, then you stay there for a very, very long time. So it's not that social media are right-wing, it's that social media in a capitalist society is they grow such that they increase economies, they increase the rich get richer, they increase the data gathering, they increase the control of few over the mass. And once this few turns out to be not the good guy, then everything collapses. And this is a real risk.
Thank you. One more question by Anubhav. As far as accountability and governance is concerned, would you agree that social media platforms following different standards of moderation in different countries contributes to the problem? For instance, in India, Twitter and Facebook have been easily giving to the Hindu nationalist and hardly censor hate speech, while in the US, they ban Trump for his polarizing views. Well, we are back to these differentiated forms of moderation. You've addressed this partly, Asma.
Yeah, regarding the moderation angle of the problem, my personal conviction is that it can't be the only answer. It's impossible. Why? Because two things. First, we can't, at the state of the art, we can't automate, the industrialization of, the algorithms of moderation. We can't do it. Why we can't do it? Because first, we have some difficulties sometimes with the retro-engineering of the algorithms. Sometimes it's hard to understand how they work in a very specific autonomous way. First. Second, they are not perfect. They are full of biases. So what should you moderate? According which criteria? And according whom? So it's a bit hard. It's not hard in France, for example, where we have, laws that decided what is wrong, what is right, what is actually legal to say, what is illegal to say. But in your gray zone, who decides? You need the human decision in the process. And the problem is, regarding the huge volume content, we can't have a moderator behind each user. It's really impossible. So we need to automate, and the problem is we can't automate at that scale first. And if we automate at that scale, we cannot just automate platforms. We also need to automate what comes after and before, and it is the state. Police, justice, regulation, actors, and we really are not at that time of our history where our administration is modernized enough, or we have sufficient allocations to do so. So we have the whole value chain of moderation is a bit weak. On a philosophical level, we have the question of what is the truth. To moderate, you need to know what you're going to moderate. If we just accept, what is legal and illegal on this gray zone, and in the US or even in other countries, in India, etc., you have, to decide what is permitted, what is not, and what is prohibited or banned. And the question is the truth. And in our democracies, it's pretty dangerous to go there. We have regimes of truth. We have our values. We can defend our vision of how to live together, of how to deal with ourselves, with freedom or not. But we cannot say that it is the truth for everybody. It's not. It's a bit hard. So we have all this problem with moderation, and in the Indian case, but also in the Vietnamese case, and you have many cases like that. What's going on is you have In October 2021, Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, leaked many documents about, how Facebook was moderating, Meta, Facebook at that time, was moderating content. And the main points was that sometimes you have, Zuckerberg taking some personal decision because, this president or this leader just call him out and just asking him to moderate or not, to apply this or that law, censorship law, etc. And Zuckerberg, on a personal stand, could decide to do it or not, or not do it. So you have, and again, you have this governance problem of the solitary exercise of power first, and the accountability towards the market and not towards, the people. And second, about the double standard of moderation. Yes, it's true, because again, in the Facebook files, Haugen showed that, internally within Meta, within Facebook, you have, the top priority countries scored to have, the full efforts of moderation, and the other countries. And the top priority countries were, of course, United States, I think Mexico, Brazil, Israel. And the second level of priority was Germany, and another one. And even France was, I think, on the fourth or fifth level of priority for Facebook. And nonetheless, I'm not talking about India and Vietnam and Ethiopia and all these third world countries. Sorry for that, but it's the American and the Facebook vision of the fragmented world. So yeah, you have this double standard, where you have, your priority countries and the rest of the world, and on the top of that, the personal decision by the tech CEOs. So yes, it's that's why I'm saying it's a democratic problem when we talk about governance. It's not just a legal issue about DSA or not. It's about how you can protect democracy and how maybe you can protect, or you can spread your values and vision. I was adding something, but no, it's gonna be not really at the heart of our subject, about the EU digital diplomacy.
Yeah. Thank you, Asma. There is a question in French that I will summarize by asking the most provocative way, and David will initiate the response. We have less than 10 minutes more. If we can demonstrate, this is Christelle who asks, Christelle Charpentier, if we can demonstrate that democracy is affected by social media, can we simply ban it? Well, this is in the same vein as Asma's response that David will be able to respond. I'm asking my little question at the end also to David. You mentioned a new voting system as one of the solutions. As the political scientist, I'm very interested in knowing what you meant by that. And we have understood that the rest of the regulations are terribly complicated to apply, even if the European Union has introduced this DSA. That is the first step. David first, and Asma will have the last word.
Yeah.
Or David, or Mark, maybe.
No, you're just saying that we have 5 minutes to finish, unfortunately. Okay. Please, David, please. No, it's a very interesting point, please.
Yeah, so just to a few remarks on the previous questions about the double standard. So just to remind that Trump was banned on January 8th, 2021. So after it attempted a coup, so it is not so. And also to remind that there is no issue of free speech on private social media. It's only a term of use. Okay, and the term of use is in the interest of the company. So the company to what it's interested. So you cannot speak about term of freedom of speech. And this is where, for example, the DSA and the MI come into action, because they say that above a certain number of users, then you have to consider that what you say on the social media is like same law applies as in the public space. So this is clearly a first attempt of regulating. So to say above the term of use, there is a law of the country, and what you say there is you have some kind of accountability towards the tribunals. So about new voting systems. So this is one of the solutions that I propose in the books, but the system itself is not my solution. So it's a voting system that. So the first things to see, it's to be aware of, is that the current voting system is profoundly unstable, and that since you can manipulate some voters, and for example, you have the vote util. So when you introduce minority candidates, it can change the rank of the winner. There is lots of failure in this system. So there is some systems. For example, one is majority judgments that have been introduced by two senior researchers that is demonstrated to be much more stable. So one of the less manipulable voting systems among different voting systems. And the principle could be explained very quickly. The principle is that instead of having only one ballot that you give to only one candidate, you evaluate every candidate on a scale between to reject to excellence. And after you have a mathematical methods that allow to take all this individual evaluation and to aggregate into a ranking. And it is demonstrated mathematically that this ranking is more robust, stable, etc. So we cannot use anymore. We should get rid of the current voting system, because it does not produce legitimate leaders, and also it is heavily manipulable. And just to finish, you don't necessarily have to ban social systems. You can create social networks. You can propose alternative social networks that are advertisement free or recommendation free, or less transparent in their algorithm. And you can also regulate. There is a lot of technical ways to regulate social network as there are now, just to forbid some. I will not go into the detail. I give this in the book. But it is a difficult question, but it is not untrackable.
Great, thank you for this ray of hope. Asma.
I'm not sure that alternative social media are in the way we understand alternative or can be a solution, because we saw, the big failure of Mastodon. So it was, the answer to Twitter, and actually it was not. And for the experience and the economic model behind it, I suppose, I assume, but maybe David can confirm that. No, actually, the pain points of these big techs or other big techs. What I'm saying is that Facebook has been disrupted by TikTok, and Twitter is still waiting for his disruptor. And Musk, within Twitter, wants, and has claimed it, wants to disrupt Google, YouTube, and all the search engines, and to gather the whole data to take, the kind of total control of our users online platforms. So it's like a platform war, actually, between them in terms of models and captation of our users and data. And big tech actually are disrupted by big tech. That would be my answer to ban. And no, regarding the ban question, I'm not a huge fan of banning things, because it's not, the idea of democracy. And what I was saying in the introduction is that we have to, because social media are weaponized, we need to think the information battle and the cognitive battle as a war, and we are all soldiers of this war, and we need that the state take into account this very new issues and go beyond just some courses of media education from time to time, and just to organize a very huge and massive awareness campaign, like in Canada with their 30 seconds program, like in Finland, where they build their own positive narrative about their model against Russia, and then empowered the whole population. The target is not only the young people, it's all of us, because conspiracy theories are not coming from schools. They are coming also, and first of all, by adults. So we just need, again, to have this systemic vision.
Thank you very much for this conclusion, but for the whole, for all the explanations, all the information you shared with us. I thank you for bringing the state back in this picture, because it's clearly a domain in which regulation is needed, even though it is not the only solution. It's not a panacea. And thank you, last but not least, for showing how serious this issue is. Social media is definitely posing a threat to democracies all over the world. And to know better how they work is something we will continue to do, to enlighten as much as we can the non-experts, the non-initiated, because we need to know how that works for fighting it more effectively and defending democracy more effectively. Thank you all, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.